subject. As with many of our other Thursday evening sessions, this one, there's a book behind this one as well. The book is Nonbeliever Nation, The Rise of Secular Americans, whose author, David Niose, is right there. I get confused which is left and which is right, but anyway, there he is. And Mr. Niose, who lives in Massachusetts, is president of the Washington-based American Humanist Association, which describes its mission as advocating progressive values and equality for humanists, atheists, and free thinkers, and which bears the motto, good without a God. A practicing lawyer, he has also worked in print and broadcast media and taught history and the law. His goals as an advocate include improving the public image of humanism and humanists, and swaying public opinion away from the religious right. And that is the dominant theme of his book, which, by the way, there are copies of out there. I believe that he'll be signing after the program, and they are available for purchase. What was the price?
$20.
$20, a bargain. The book has gotten mixed but generally favorable reviews. Steven Pinker.
The only negative reviews have come from the Chesterton Society.
Well, not quite. I'm going to cite one, please. Steven Pinker, the renowned Harvard psychologist and author of The Better Angels of Our Nature, hailed it as demonstrating that America's growing secular demographic, quote, offers much hope for rational public policy and discourse. Bill Nye, also known as the Science Guy, says Niose shows that saying you're religious and claiming to know absolutely what is good and what is not is bad for all of us. On the other hand, Kirkus, one of the three major publications offering advance reviews to booksellers, librarians, and others in the publication business, founded a, quote, useful examination of secularism, unquote, but a, quote, loaded attack on religion in which the vast majority of religious Americans do not find themselves at all. And that brings me to the rebuttal, which will be offered by Anthony Zamaro, who reportedly occupies a niche somewhere between the vast majority and the religious far right. I don't know where. Mr. Zamaro is a chemical engineer by profession who describes himself as an amateur student of theology, sociology, and psychology. More to the point, perhaps, he is president of the G.K. Chesterton Society's chapter in Worcester, Massachusetts. Chesterton, as many of you probably know, was an early 20th century writer who dealt with the intersection between, or among, faith, culture, and modern society. Excuse me. It's an intersection prone to collisions, as we know, and as we witnessed sharply in the recent election campaign. Mr. Zamaro and Mr. Niose have had public debates twice before. I have not asked who won. We'll start off with a traditional debate format. Each will get 10 minutes for a presentation, then 5 minutes for rebuttal. But then we'll go into a more relaxed and informal give and take time, with plenty of time for questions from the audience. So, Please welcome our debaters, and then we'll get right into it, starting with David Niose.
Well, thank you very much. You've fed me some wine, so you're sure to hear my opinions tonight. I might even give them to you sober, but after a glass of wine or two, you're in it. Thank you very much to Doug for arranging this and for everyone else who helped put this together. I love the debate format. I give lectures from time to time and I talk about my book and other things, but I think the debate format is just a lot of fun. It gives a chance for real exchange and challenging of ideas. In fact, from time to time I'm met with a question or position that I really have a hard time rebutting, and it happened just a few weeks ago. I was debating, if you will, with a woman, and she said that she was taking the Christian position, and she said, well, you know, if Jesus isn't real, then why are vampires afraid of crosses? And, you know, you really do have a hard time rebutting some of these positions. So, anyway, maybe some of you can answer that, but I just don't know anyway. The debate topic tonight is, America is becoming more secular. Is that good or bad? Well, obviously, as far as I'm concerned, it is not only good, but it's happening not a moment too soon. We should keep in mind there's a couple things when we talk about America becoming more secular. There's secular government. Are we becoming more secular in that we're respecting secular government more? And then there's the question of the secular demographic, people personally becoming more secular. Okay? And I think clearly the statistics seem to show that people are becoming more secular, that personal secularity is on the move in America, that the secular demographic is growing. I'm not so sure America is becoming more secular in terms of respecting secular government. If you follow church-state separation over the last 30 years, I think it's pretty hard to argue that America as a government is respecting church-state separation more as the years clip on. If anything, it seems to be the other. So I'm not so sure I agree with the basic premise that America is becoming more secular. Its people are, but its government, not so much. But anyway, is secularism good for America? Is the growth of secularism good? My goodness, it certainly is. And I would just ask you to take a look at what religion has done to America and American public policy over the last 30 years. You know, when we talk about religion involved in government, we tend to think of church-state separation, like that's the area where politically engaged religion becomes problematic because the wall of separation, Jefferson's wall of separation, is threatened when we have too much religion in government. I want to set church-state separation aside, though, because we need to realize that politically engaged religious activists affect public policy far beyond church-state separation. In fact, I would challenge you to point to just about any major area of public policy that has not been tainted and hurt by the involvement of religious activists, especially over the last 30 years since Jerry Falwell and the Moral Majority became more and more influential, and the Christian Coalition, Focus on the Family, all these religious right groups that have exerted so much influence in government. Name any area of public policy and I can point to how it's been tainted by the influence of this religious activist group. Politics. Now we have congressmen all over the country who are proudly anti-science, proudly so. Not just anti-science, but they wear it like a badge. We have congressmen sitting on the science committee in Congress who reject evolution, who are proud to say that they think the world is less than 10,000 years old. This is what the political realm has become with the rise of religious activists. Look at Rick Perry just last year when he announced his candidacy for president. How did he do it? with a prayer rally in a football stadium, filling a football stadium, piped to churches all over the country. Stop and think about that. We are in the second decade of the 21st century, and this is how a serious political candidate announces his candidacy? That should scare everyone in this room, religious or secular. That is not a healthy environment at all. That would have been unthinkable even in the Republican Party 30 years ago. It would have been politically toxic. His career would have been over. This now, in today's America, he came out of that rally leading in the polls. It was a smart political move for him to announce his candidacy that way. Now, he later crashed and burned as a candidate because he was such a poor candidate, but the reality remains that the exaltation of religion that way publicly in American politics is healthy today for a political candidate in the GOP. Scary stuff, folks, okay? That's not where we should be as a nation. Look beyond that. Look into education policy. Who is driving the charge to teach creationism in school and really opposing sound science education? Of course, it's politically engaged religious activists. That's who's changing the history books. You may not know about this unless you follow it closely, but down in Texas, they booted Thomas Jefferson out of the history books and inserted Thomas Aquinas as an important influence on early American political philosophy. This is real. Who's pushing abstinence-only sex education, proven to be ineffective, but it's religiously sound, so it's happening in much of the country. Move into environmental policy. Who's leading the charge to deny global warming and whatnot? To deny sustainable environmental policy, in fact. It's the religious demographic again, the ardently conservative religious demographic. There's a whole sector of the religious right that believes in dominionism. If you look at the Bible, it tells you God gave man dominion over earth. We don't need to worry about sustainable environmental policy. Now, for educated, enlightened people who maybe aren't following this area too closely, you may think that's ridiculous, but it's a very, very strong thread in American culture. It's out there, this dominionism stuff. Move into social policy. You know, the debate used to be about abortion and whatnot. Abortion's not the big issue anymore. Now they want to talk about birth control. Okay? Birth control. This is a controversial issue in the second decade of the 21st century in America. Okay? No. The isolation of secularism, the fight against secular government and the secular demographic having a place at the table in American government has been harmful to America. Very harmful. We need an emergence of secularism in America, very much so. Now, you could talk about, is a secular society really good? Do we really want to be downplaying religion and promoting the idea of religious-free government, if you will? Well, certainly you do, and I can show you statistics and studies to prove it, okay? Across the board, you look at social problems and social ills, okay? Things like murder rates, violent crime rates, STD rates, things like this, the divorce rates even, just about any social problem you can point to, okay? Teen pregnancy rates. It's stunning when you really, really look at the numbers, okay? Those rates, when you compare secular societies to more religious societies, across the board, the rates are much higher in religious societies. And that applies internationally when you compare the more religious United States to more secular societies such as Western Europe. And it applies internally within the United States when you compare more secular states to more religious states. These social problems and social ills stack up overwhelmingly more on the religious side. Now, I'm not arguing that religion necessarily causes these social problems. Obviously, it's complex. Correlation does not equal cause. I'm not trying to make that argument. I think I could, but I'm not making that argument, okay? But what I am saying is the secular, it's silly to demonize and vilify secularism in light of those kind of overwhelming correlations and overwhelming statistics. Certainly, secularity does not cause. We can debate whether religion causes these problems or not, and I don't want to go there tonight. But certainly, in the face of such overwhelming statistics favoring secularity, one cannot argue that secularity causes such social problems. In fact, the reality is the secular demographic and secularism in general has much to be proud of. Over 90% of the National Academy of Sciences embraces atheist or agnostic religious views on religion. Okay, that's nothing to be ashamed of. Okay, what would happen? Imagine if you removed the National Academy of Sciences from American culture. I mean, really, these are people who contribute, who are probably the greatest contributors to our society. You think American society is dumb now. Imagine if you pulled the National Academy of Sciences out of it. My goodness, we need secular Americans, and we need secularism in America. There's no serious argument that more secularism in America would somehow be harmful to this country. So I'll leave it at that and turn it over to my opponent.
I don't know if this is going to work. Do my best here. All right, seems to be working. Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
So I'll do my best to make a serious argument, but you forgot your mic.
Oh, that's I probably had enough.
So I want to thank Doug and the Redwood Library for inviting us. Dave and I were talking. We'd done this twice before in Worcester, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed both occasions. I didn't actually debate in the second one, David did. But the Chesterton Society had debated the humanists twice, and we were talking again about another debate. We wanted to do one-on-one where we had done group things before. And we were asking about a venue. I think both of us were thinking of something. We kind of had patched something together at previous occasions, and this really exceeds my expectations of a great place to have a debate. It's a great environment. So just to give you a little background on myself, because I think it does matter where people are coming from when they're speaking. I'm a former atheist myself, but grew up, not in a dedicated sense, but certainly as a teenager, wasn't really religious, didn't really think that much about religion. My parents aren't religious, no real formation as a kid religiously. So it's not a cultural standpoint I'm speaking from. It kind of was something like G.K. Chesterton. I don't want to compare myself to Chesterton. He was an intellectual giant, but in a similar sense, kind of stumbled on it through things like this, through asking what the truth was in discourse and debate and trying to find answers. So that was kind of my journey to faith. In terms of what I'm going to speak about, I'm a Catholic. I don't speak for every color of Christian or every belief. And similar to Dave, I get some weird questions that I can't answer because I think somebody in a previous debate asked me if I agree with executing witches. And I haven't had any experience executing witches, so I gather they do that somewhere still. But my positions are fairly vanilla in terms of any orthodox, quote-unquote, Christian should pretty much be on the same page with, is this too loud?
Yeah.
That's good. Any Christian should be pretty much on the same page with what I'm saying. There's nothing really controversial in my comments. So to get into my perspective on this, I don't think that, my perspective is not necessarily the polar opposite of Dave's. I don't think that religion should dominate public policy or be the dominant voice in public policy. I think a diversity of opinions is a good thing, and that it's really what our society is based on. A lot of the collisions that we see in public life is just the nature of our democracy. It's kind of how things work. I think that secular humanists, religious people of various ideologies kind of contribute to the fabric of American society, that it's really the diversity. I think a religious society, and this echoes kind of quote-unquote official church teaching. As a Catholic, I have official church teaching. Some Christians do and do not. But the church does not seek to set itself up as the governing body of a society. And Jesus said himself, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and the things that are God's unto God. And the church throughout history has always interpreted that there's a civil structure that governs society, and let's limit our conversation to that. I think that that's a fairly common perspective. And again, speaking as a former atheist myself, I think it's a current in our modern thought. It's fairly common. To restate it simply, please don't bother me with all that religious stuff. Let's limit it to science. So I want to point out two errors with that principle. One's theoretical and one's practical. So I don't know about the crowd. The thing that came to my mind, the thing that came to mind when I was writing my notes, is that me or am I on? So the thing that came to mind when I was writing my notes is, I don't know if folks here listen to the band Rush, but there's a song, I think I can reach I got enough volume here to reach you without the microphone. The band Rush has a song called Free Will. I'm sorry to inject pop music into the conversation, but there's a line in the song where it says, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And when it comes down to metaphysics, metaphysics is the word of what scientism is trying to exclude, things other than science. Logical thought about how the world exists and what it means other than science. If you choose not to engage in metaphysics, that's a personal choice that people make. That's their philosophy of how they want to think about the world. But by choosing that, by choosing not to engage metaphysics, you've made a choice. You've made a metaphysical decision. You've said, I don't like that stuff. And you could exclude it for different reasons. You could say, I think it's bunk. The people I've met who are religious are, they're all wackos, and so I'm kind of excluding that. Or you may have a really logically laid out argument for why you want to exclude it, but you've made a metaphysical decision. You've said, I'm excluding this area of knowledge. And you've really, by making that decision, you're making a metaphysical statement. So adherents of scientism are claiming to have solved the metaphysical problem, being that we can't talk about this stuff because we're not on the same page, by saying that metaphysics doesn't exist. They deny metaphysics, or rather promote a negative metaphysics, and then claim to only accept data that comes from science and logic. So what's claimed as a compromise, as kind of a common ground, is interestingly enough the exact ground that the secularist wants to speak from. So it's not really a fair ground. It's not really the common ground. It's the ground that the secularist is already standing on. He has made a metaphysical decision that's different than what other people have made, and then claims that as a common ground. And I think that's a fallacy. I think that that's a misleading argument. It's necessary to have the conversation. It's necessary to talk about it. We may disagree, but it's not a true statement to say that we're arriving at a common ground when you've denied a body of knowledge that other people believe to be true. So that's the theoretical aspect of that argument. The practical aspect is a thought experiment. We read recently in the media pretty extensively about the Higgs boson particle. And it was really interesting news, and I think a lot of us were engaged by it. Let me know if I'm going over time. I have no idea. No time or anything.
A few more minutes.
So we were a lot of us were engaged by this subject. And I don't think anyone here would deny that it's true. That what the scientists were discovering was a true thing. But how many of us examined the data? How many of us examined the instruments that produced the data? Maybe there's some enthusiasts here that did, but I certainly didn't. But I still believe that it was true. I still believe that it was true. So my intellectual acceptance of the fact that that's true is not based on logic and reason, because I did not logically arrive at that conclusion from fundamental data. I trusted that the mediating enterprises that brought me that knowledge were telling me the truth, whether it be the scientists, whether it be the scientific journals in which it was published, whether it was just the media, the New York Times, or my local paper, that they were telling me something that was true. I was exercising faith in those intervening organizations. So that practical example demonstrates the fact that we all exercise faith. We just exercise faith in different organs. So you can get into the discussion of which organs are more acceptable, but I think that the framing of the conversation is one side is basing it on logic and reason, and the other side is basing it on faith is misleading. Because we all have faith. We all have faith, and especially when it comes to the ordering of society and public policy, people aren't balls on a pool table. We don't knock off each other in really disciplined and ordered, you can't make an equation for how people are going to act. So when we make public policy, we're depending on a lot of really smart people that make kind of aggregate decisions. They make empirical decisions based on disparate data. And I don't think science should be excluded from that conversation. Not at all. But I think it's really difficult to say I'm going to base public policy only on the result of science and research. It's not really a realistic statement. What you're doing is you're exercising an act of faith on a certain body that participates and transmits knowledge in different ways. So a couple notes just to wrap up. I think that when you ask, and again, I'm not making the argument that religion should be the sole source, but just to give you kind of an argument pro why religion is a good source, because I think it is in question. I think most of the things you read in the media, most of the television, the news outlets that are readily available, they don't think that religion is really a good place to get knowledge on how we should order society. But I think the best arguments for religion are not any particular religion. I think most religions, 95% of the religions out there, not only do they agree on most of the ways we should order our public life, but they have thousands of years of cumulative experience at ordering societies. And even some atheists are starting to realize this. There was an interesting podcast I saw recently on C-SPAN. It was Religion for Atheists was the book. And it was basically arguing that religion has ordered society really well for thousands of years, and atheists need to learn some of the techniques that religion has used as outlets, social outlets for pain and suffering, for art, for creativity, for the ordering of family life, for order and structure. And those are things that religions have thousands of years of experience. Whether it be Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, there's this vast body of knowledge of what makes a society tick and the things that can unseat a society. So that's the kind of the weak pro argument for why religion is not, it's not vampires and holy water. There's a lot of practical bread and butter stuff in a lot of the religious principles that people like the folks that attended the Rick Perry conference were looking to someone who shared a set of beliefs to say, this is somebody who understands how I think society should be ordered based on a tradition that my family has followed for hundreds of years, in some cases more. Our culture has followed for thousands of years. So I think we'll be able to get into these questions more as time goes on, or as the night goes on. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session. It's always what I find the most fun. It's interesting to let you guys watch us dance a little bit. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, a few minutes for rebuttal, I guess. The question before us tonight is whether more secularism in America is good or bad. I'm not sure a lot of the points raised just now really were pro-religion, but a couple of the points made are definitely worth addressing. One was the suggestion that the secular position that a more secular America or more secularism in America is somehow an effort to stamp out religion. That certainly is not the case. I think if we're going to consider whether the rise of secularism in America, or more secularism in America, is good or bad, we must take a snapshot and say, well, just how secular is America now? How is the role of religion right now affecting America? Because if we're going to consider whether more secularism is necessary, we need to consider the influence now of religion. And my point is, really, the central point that I would make is that currently the religious interests in America, particularly the segment that we would call the religious right, has undue influence in this country. I'm certainly not standing here saying we need to stamp out fundamentalist religion or any religion. Obviously, I completely agree with Tony when he says that America is a pluralistic country, and we should celebrate the tapestry that is America, the melting pot that is America, the cultural diversity. It's wonderful. It's really one of the things that really makes America fairly unique compared to most other countries. My point is, within that tapestry, there is an element that I would call the fundamentalist, conservative, religious right that has grossly undue influence. Its influence in this country is just out of whack with what a healthy pluralistic diversity should be. And as I said, I pointed out that we have numerous members of Congress now sitting on the Science Committee. This should scare us, who reject evolution. And half the American population, over half, rejects evolution. That's not a healthy condition to be in for a nation that is, the most powerful military force in the world. We are a nation that could stamp out life very quickly on this planet, and we have an enormous segment of the population that believes Armageddon is inevitable, and it may happen in our lifetime. Something like 30 to 35% of Americans believe that the apocalypse is going to happen in our lifetime. They look at Middle East developments, politics and developments in the Middle East, and they see it as prophetic, as a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, of course, if we're a culturally diverse country, there's inevitably going to be a few people who look at this way, but we have an enormous segment of our population that sees the world and interprets the world this way. We had Sarah Palin, and there are other very high-profile politicians who weren't far from the Oval Office, if you think about it. I mean, she was a vice presidential candidate, could have been elected. She was a heartbeat away. And this is somebody who looks at the Middle East as fulfilling biblical prophecy. People who look at Armageddon and say, bring it on. They look optimistically towards the end of the world. And I don't like to be too alarmist, but it's just one policy area after another. When you look at and you see, we need more rational, sober, secular thinking in this country, okay? Look at Western Europe, where secularity is widespread, where open atheists are being elected all the time to office. And they have very low crime rates, very low rates of most social policies. Their incarceration rates are a fraction of what America's incarceration is. We should be ashamed of the incarceration rate in this country. It far exceeds any other country on the planet. This is not where we should be as a society. And we can only gain, we can only see social progress and better times for all Americans if we appreciate the secular demographic. I'll just wrap up by pointing out, Tony was saying, yes, we need a pluralistic society. We need a variety of ideas. I agree completely. Then why is it that open atheists can't get elected to office in America, okay? If we're talking about having a secular society, a diverse society, well, then obviously we need more secularism if there are no elected officials who are openly secular, okay? Isn't that a problem? So I think that is exhibit one when we're talking about whether there's enough secularism in America. If there are no open seculars being elected, that really points to part of the problem. We need more secularism in America. We don't need total secularism. We don't need to convert everyone to secularity. That's not the point here. But we do need more secularism in America.
According to the Mayan religion, the apocalypse will occur approximately a month from now, which will make all of this irrelevant.
Or you could add a sense of urgency. So I guess, you know, I think it's important to define what secularity is, and I think that on a couple scales, American culture could be described as getting more secular. I think a lot of what Dave refers to in his book and in his talk tonight is it's kind of a trend in our culture, which is kind of a breakdown of kind of the cultural ties. I think the vast majority of people tend to kind of go with the flow. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with that per se. You know, I think personally I adhere to the unexamined life is not worth living maxim, but I think that the general flow of people go with what their neighbors do and what the general gist of culture is. And I think that was a lot of those religious traditions were just kind of, and it was not necessarily that the folks that were guiding those traditions weren't actively engaged intellectually and weren't thinking about these things, but I think the general folks were kind of just going with the flow. And I think today, you know, there's certainly a struggle. I think that there's a struggle between a secular force in our culture and a religious force in our culture. And I think a lot of the battles that you see are a result of this. And I think one of the mistakes, this is kind of what I tried to point out earlier, is to view secularism as kind of a neutral position, as kind of like the zero setting on your stereo or something, you know, that it's kind of this imbalanced and, you know, we're not really taking a point of view, but it absolutely is. And something I was thinking about when I was coming up with these notes is you don't put a scientific theory on the bumper of your car. You know, you don't put like the Pythagorean theorem on your car, you know, but you do put the Darwin thing on your car. You know, not everybody does, but a lot of people do. A lot of people probably in your society do. And I think it's demonstrating that this is an ideology. This is an active perspective that's seeking to define how we view reality. And I'm not saying, the point isn't that it's right or wrong, but it's not a neutral setting. It's not kind of an impartial thing. It's a way of defining how we view the world. And it's opposed to the religious point of view. And again, not to make a content, I think that's a whole separate debate, which we've gotten into kind of in previous debates of what's true and which is right. But I think that the topic here tonight is the increase in secularity good for America? And I think a lot of the discussion revolves around this notion that it's kind of this neutral setting, that it's, you know, it's just impartial, and it really isn't. It's a point of view, and I think that the conflicts you see are a result of that. Now, whether it's good for society or not, I mean, in general, I don't think it is. I don't think it's better for people to be further away from God, but the tone and kind of the method of discussing it really doesn't lend to a discussion of why I think that God is good. But at the same time, I think that there are some general considerations in terms of the things that make up a culture. Culture is an extremely complex thing, and I think a lot of the cases that Dave uses, culture is the X factor. You know, you compare Northern Europe to the United States, they're vastly different, not just in matter of religious belief, but in culture and in the way society is organized. And a lot of those things play in, and it's really hard to isolate. And I don't think Dave did this necessarily. He said, you know, correlation does not equal causation. But I think that it's very difficult to isolate these single factors. But I do think that there's something that I think a lot of us can sense, and the word that I give to it is cultural capital. But there's certain things in society that we build up that kind of, you set aside a reserve against hard times, and you build up the strength of a society. And I think secularism tends to look at the world and the way things are ordered and to say, and perhaps this is a little unfair, so I'm going to overstate the case and say, what can I get away with? And it's what can I do that doesn't hurt others? Or what are the limits of my personal freedom, and what can I do? And I think the religious point of view tends to look more at what is best for society, what is best for my neighbor, and to build that cultural capital that tends to get eroded. And I think a lot of us consensus. So that's my general.
The concept of morality is really the concept of of understanding what's socially acceptable and what's personally acceptable. All social animals live by rules. They live in a way where there's acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior. And humans are no different. Those rules of living in human society we call morality. And morality, believe it or not, is not something that's dictated from above, but it's actually an innate sense. It's an innate impulse in the human animal. It's something that has developed within us biologically through our evolution. We are moral animals because we are social animals. We have an innate sense of what is right and wrong. The secular societies, in fact, seem to have almost a better understanding of what's right or wrong. If you look at more secular societies, they tend to have lower crime rates. Now, you could explain that in some sort of theological way, but the reality is that if you are acting morally only because you believe that there's some supreme being watching you who's going to judge you after you die, well, that doesn't really say much for your inner morality, does it? You're only acting morally to avoid punishment. As an atheist, I act morally because I sense what is right, how to act in society. It's really just an innate impulse. Even a small child understands that hurting another child is not right. Okay? That's human.
Let me ask Anthony, can you be good without God?
Yes, I think that individually, this was actually the topic of our last debate. We had, is God necessary for morality? And you guys had a wonderful old man, Unitarian pastor, who his personal example of his life was really exemplary. He was an atheist. He was a professed atheist. He's not here tonight, is he? He was a great guy. I really appreciated talking with him. But I think, Dostoevsky's passage in the Brothers Karamazov, one of the brothers argues that without God, all things are permissible. And I think this is the argument I gave in the previous debate. I think there are folks out there who live exemplary lives, like the pastor at the last debate. They're very morally strong people. They're very personally, people are different. Some folks are born with kind of an innate strength and self-control. They can govern their passions pretty well. Other folks can. And I think the thing that we forget in that equation is that morality is a communal thing. We learn from each other, we demonstrate to each other. And some of the folks who are a little weaker, maybe they can't make these kind of stalwart decisions that I'm going to live this moral life just because I should and God's not watching. But personally, I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not the guy that's going to, be 80 and talking about how great I did without God. And it's not to take away from his accomplishments, but I think that what Dostoevsky says is true, that in the interior of our souls, we all make decisions. We all have an interior room we retreat into, and there's going to be a time in your life, and most of the folks here are older, and there's probably already been a time in your life when you can make a decision that nobody's watching, that no one will ever see what you did, and it could be right or wrong. And when there's that third person in the room with you, it makes a difference. It does, when someone's watching. And I think everybody knows, as a former atheist, I don't think I was really an atheist. I think I knew that God was watching. But I think that folks who listen to the voice have a little bit extra strength in that moment when we're all tempted, which we all are, to do the wrong thing. So I think it does make a difference.
Okay, David wants to say something very briefly.
I would just say, if there's anyone out there who honestly believes that if they stop believing in God, they're going to go out and murder, rape, and rob, then please keep believing in God. But I think if you really do some inner searching, you'll find out that with God, the most horrific things are possible as well. I think, in fact, the human animal seems to feel that the most horrific of crimes are possible when they're done in the name of God.
How can you say that? I want to bring up two really good atheists, Hitler and Stalin. And if you want to think that all scientists are good and honest, just think. The scientists who ran the death camps at Auschwitz were the best scientists in Germany. And they thought what they were doing is good and honest because they were trying to please the Führer. When you get rid of God, when you get rid of eternal truth, then you decide the truth. You're God. Well, you also do away with America. If you want to make it secular, it's another country. The only reason why the American miracle happened is that we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. You take away God, and we don't have those rights. They come from the government. That happened in Russia. That happened everywhere.
Jefferson was a deist.
He was a deist, but he wrote the Bill of Rights with a man named Charles Carroll of Carrollton, who was the only Catholic who signed the Declaration of Independence. And he went to school to the Jesuits in France. And he studied Thomas Aquinas' theology, where you had inalienable rights from God for life, liberty. Jefferson added the pursuit of happiness, actually. But this dignity of every human being is the whole secret of America's success in the world. And if you take it away, you make us. I'm not saying you're not going to marry it, because I believe in the natural law, which everybody has.
Anthony would like to respond to this.
I would just ask, one thing I think that befits the kind of environment is that we let Doug run things. And so I get really passionate about these things too, but the structure of the debate really lends to the quality of the discussion. But I was going to say, I do agree a lot. I think that the one point I would make is that principle, we all have to rely on first principles. None of what we think is all self-evident. So when we take away God, there is kind of a vacuum there of how we define things and how we argue things. How we would say, if somebody wants to take my life or my family's life, what principles do I appeal to prove him wrong?
Ethics. Constitution.
Hitler thought he was ethical. So he was rational. He was operating from different first principles. So again, I think Doug, if you want to.
Excuse me.
Can I?
Excuse me for 1 minute.
Excuse me, no. This question was really directed
Well, I want to
at me.
respond to her also.
Yeah,
So
well,
may I do it after you do it? Or may I do it right now in 1 minute?
Well, I drove 2 hours down here, so I really want to
I don't
address this.
think quoting Hitler and other Nazis quite compares with and what they did to other human beings, including the very people of Christ's background, quite equates with the Catholics during Torquemada, during the Inquisition. The Nazis were pale imitations, but the other things were done in the name of Christ, to Christ's own people.
I really, you put an awful lot on the table there with your questions and comments, and it would take a long time to address them all thoroughly. But the one thing I want to address is the issue of the Holocaust, and this is something I do address at some length in the book. It is really beyond dispute that the anti-Semitism, which ultimately gave rise to the Holocaust, is rooted in Christianity and Christian Europe, not in any sort of atheistic philosophy. As someone pointed out, Hitler was raised Catholic and was never excommunicated by his church. In fact, the Nazis were very much opposed to free thought movements, and Germany before the rise of the Nazis had healthy atheist and humanist communities. These communities were oppressed by the Nazis when they came to power. the anti-Semitism that was really venomous in Europe is rooted in Christianity. It's not rooted in any sort of humanist or atheist philosophy. In fact, there was a census done in Germany in 1939, the height of the Nazis' power, and 96% of Germans identified as Christian. The majority were Protestants, but the rest were Catholic. As you know, Germany is both a Protestant and a Catholic country, strong demographics of each. Only about 2% identified as unbelievers. Hitler's Mein Kampf is filled with references to the divinity and to God, and how the Nazis and how Germany were fulfilling God's work. The belt buckle of the SS said God with us on it, in German of course, but it said God with us. Don't dare to blame the Holocaust or the brutal treatment of Jews and others in Europe on the secular demographic or secularity at all. Now, we can turn to other horrific crimes such as Stalin, but the reality is, if you look at any secular democracy that respects human rights, you see the closest thing we have to prosperous, healthy civic environments. Communist Russia was built on an authoritarian base of years, of centuries of Tsarist Russia. It's very little surprise that the government that arose out of the Russian Revolution was something short of a Jeffersonian democracy. Stalin, in fact, was a religious student. He was studying for the clergy before he joined the Communist Party. So it's just it's a scapegoat. It's a false argument.
But when
Time out. There are several hands out there. I think about 2/3 of the people here have raised their hands at one point or another. So let's try to keep the questions short, and let's try to keep the answers short. And you only get one bite of the apple. I'm sorry.
Closer to home, I find it rather ironic that here we are in Rhode Island, founded by Roger Williams, whose sole purpose in getting a charter from the King of England was for religious liberty, because he was driven out of Massachusetts by religious zealots. So I mean, you know, here we are discussing that here, which I think our history is really something we can be very proud of. So, my question is simply this. Closer to home, we've seen recently a couple of things. In the city of Cranston, in the junior high school, the school had put up the Lord's Prayer on the wall. And a young lady who was an atheist objected to it. And the American Civil Liberties Union came in. There was a big fight. But they covered it over. The court said, you know, separation of church and state, they covered it over. Again, in Woonsocket, about 2 months later, in the middle of the square, there were a couple of crosses that was set up. One cross, rather, in memory of a couple of World War II veterans, okay, sitting in the middle of the square. And again, the American Civil Liberties Union come in. My question is this: why is the American Civil Liberties Union so exercised over these things that really aren't bothering anybody? In fact, if you don't like what you see, don't look at it. You can drive by it or go someplace else. I mean, it's a free society. Am I missing something? I'm asking the question.
What you're missing is the separation of church and state. That's what you're missing. The First Amendment, the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment forbids the commingling, if you will, of religion and government. And it's not right for a public school to post a prayer on the wall. And how dare you say, well, if you don't like it, don't look at it. What if it said, what if it was an explicit prayer to Jesus? Would you tell the Jews in the school, oh, well, if you don't like it, don't look at it? It's, you know, what people don't understand on the religious side is the sense of neutrality, okay? Taking that banner down is not hostile to religion. What would be hostile to religion is putting a banner up saying there is no God. Okay, there's a difference. Neutrality is very simple. Just keep government out of it. If you want to go to a prayer club after school, go to a prayer club, okay? The government is not going to force atheism on you. For some reason, there's this sense of theistic supremacy in America. That yes, we have separation of church and state, but we all, wink, wink, know that essentially we're a theistic country, and we all must put up with theism. No, we don't. Neutrality is neutrality.
I would just add to that. I think that even amongst the founders, there was kind of a plurality of opinion on this. And I think nowhere in the Constitution does it say separation of church and state. It's not in the Constitution. And Jefferson did say an absolute wall separating church and state, but other founders had different opinions on what the separation of church and state meant. I think that there's a general principle that, first of all, I think government should not interfere in church affairs. I think that's the original intent of the First Amendment, is that the government shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. It's fairly simple. It can't make laws that affect religious institutions. I think that there's a valid plea for plurality in the public square, that it's not right to erect a Christian monument but forbid the erection of a Jewish monument or even an atheist monument, if there are such things. But I think that there is this sense that there are people that want to exclude prayer groups from public schools, that want to say you can't do it in public schools. And I think that is the exercise of a positive ideology of secularism that is exercising its rights over and above, in some environments, over and above religious believers. I think that's where it's wrong. I don't think that the separation of church and state means you never have to look at a cross. I don't think it means that you never have to see it even in a public building. But I do think that there is a valid point of it that's open to everyone.
But what about the fact that churches wish to restrict the rights of women for subsidized birth control, for legal abortions?
I think
they can't expect to be protected on one side and then charge on the other side.
Is there a Bible in this library?
Let's keep Doug in control here if we could. It's the best way to. Okay, so I was going to ask, is she important? Or I have to. So the answer I would give to that, I'll just answer that question. I think that the way that is framed is one of those soft, aggressive stances towards religious belief. Is it the church asserting what it thinks over the government or over other people, or is the government asserting what it thinks on religious bodies? The church didn't start the contraception fight, and I think this is really, it's kind of a backdrop of the division that's come up in our society. The thought that there was anything a major religious body would teach that's in opposition to the public good was totally outside the realm of what the founders would think. They would never think that they would have to govern a church, because no one thought that there was anything wrong. No one believed in birth control in 1776. It was wrong. And up until 1930, everyone thought it was wrong. So I don't think that the recent contraception controversy is a matter of the church exerting its will over other people. It's the government exerting its will on religious believers, which I think is wrong.
Okay, in the back.
I was just wondering, this is for you, Dave, with cyberbullying. You said that children today inherently know what's good and bad, but yet we have children, terrorizing other children. They're like jumping off of bridges and killing themselves on the internet. So in your utopian world of socialism or whatever it is, what would secularism? What would be, your cure for that particular, tunnel right there? I mean, you have kids today in like 2nd
problem of modernity, you know, where we have social media now, and there's cyberbullying, and we have all these problems in the modern world. I question how you could possibly think that religion is going to solve these problems. So sure, you know, everything's going to be hunky-dory going down the road, but I can tell you, ancient theology is not going to be the answer to it. But as far as what secularity does bring to the equation is a respect for rational thinking and critical thinking. And I think that is very valuable at this point in human history. You know, it's something that you know, to understand the human condition for what it really is. You know, we're all of African descent, folks. We are truly one human family. Humanism can appreciate that.
The same respect for a guy with a cross on his grave?
What's that?
The same respect that a guy with a cross on his grave would get?
Let's limit the shout-outs here. Let's put Dave back in the driver's seat.
I don't quite.
But you don't seem to respect Christians.
I certainly respect Christians. I just don't want them dictating public policy.
Okay, back there. Yes, sir.
You know, I think this evening's discussion was about the good or the bad of secularism. My essential question, by the way, there is something called ethical culture, where people don't have religion and they raise children with ethical beliefs. My question is, in our present secular society, free democratic society, do you think it's right, Mr. Zamaro, for a bunch of religious fanatics to impose their religious views on the rest of us while their churches have tax benefits and do not pay taxes, do not pay real estate taxes? Should we allow them to impose their will on us and then have the benefit of not paying taxes, not paying income tax, not paying real estate tax? If they want to stand from the pulpit and tell people how to vote last week, then they should have their tax benefits removed. Do you agree with this?
I think it's interesting because, as I said, in 1776, if you look at the religious diversity, so to speak, in the 13 colonies when the Constitution was written, it was various flavors of Christian. You know, Catholics were oppressed down in Maryland and other places where they were, and there were some Jews interspersed. There was probably very few Hindus or Asian, you know, Eastern religious adherents. So folks had kind of a homogeneous view of kind of the contribution religion made to society, and folks thought that it was a net positive. But as I do, the reason churches were tax exempt is because, and there may have been political motives in terms of, in Massachusetts actually, the church, even after the Declaration of Independence, was the political power in the state. But I think that the argument for churches being tax exempt is that they provide a net benefit to society, that they operate charitable institutions, that they're encouraging people to be good, they're advocating civic virtues that make it easier to govern a nation. And a lot of the founders said as much, that religious believers are the easiest people to govern because they tend to foster at home, at no government expense, the virtues that make a good Republican, small r Republican citizen. In terms of the recent presidential election, I don't think that it's appropriate for pastors to say from the pulpit, you should not vote for Barack Obama. I don't think that that's
against the law.
I think that would be. I know that they did. I know that there were some pastors that did. But nor is it appropriate to disallow religious believers to say, this particular institution or this party, this political party, is promoting ideas that are contrary to what our faith says are true.
We're protected under our Constitution to have our own opinions and our own rights to say it. But from the authority of the pulpit, I don't think that's appropriate. And if so, then it becomes a political institution, no longer a religious one, and it should not have tax deduction.
I think Mahatma Gandhi said that anyone who thinks that religion and politics shouldn't have anything to do with each other understands neither religion nor politics. I don't think that, as I said, I don't want pastors governing. I don't want to elect the Pope as President of the United States. But I don't think you can, I also say that you can detract or vacuum out all religious belief from how people make political decisions. And I don't think anyone's interfering with your right of free speech. We're all here tonight. David is saying things that, you know, I would find morally problematic, but I'm not telling him he can't say them, and nor would I say it to you. Yes.
Who, me?
You in the back, yeah.
Yeah, on the idea that evolution is an ideology, I don't think anyone who understands science could make such a statement. It's corroborated by genetics, the fossil record, atavisms. Intermediate species appear exactly where you would expect them. The standard of evidence in faith is a reverence for custom. That's all there is to it. And so that's an ideology.
By saying that evolution is an ideology, I'm not saying evolution is untrue. I'm not a creationist. I believe in evolution. I think that, you know, the evidence for evolution is fairly indisputable. I think the evidence isn't. You need to have a degree of faith in evolution, because it's certainly not a, you know, you don't have data pointing to each one. It's still a theory, but I think it's a true theory. I believe evolution is good science. What I mean by an ideology, again, you don't put a scientific theory on your bumper. It's, you know, there is a certain, I think what the evolutionists did, and Darwin I think was fairly neutral on the subject, but what they did, and it, as I said, I think most folks in a society kind of go with the flow. Most folks are pretty simple. I don't think they attend salons and have these discussions, and that doesn't mean they're bad people. There are a lot of good people out there that kind of go with the flow. Darwin upset the social order. He introduced a theory that really had people scratching their heads. Do I think he shouldn't have introduced it? No, I think it's a good thing. Learning is good. It's good to know more of the truth. But I think that there was an ideology that sprung from Darwinism that said the old explanations don't make sense anymore. We need to reject them. And I don't think that that's true. I think you can believe in evolution, and this is hard to do. People are extremes. I don't go with the creationists. I don't think that they're right, and I would have the same debate with the creationists. But I think that there is this current of thought that says, now that we have Darwin, we have this explanation of how things came to be, we don't need religion anymore. And I think that that's the ideology. So again, I don't have any bone to pick with evolution. I think it's true. Sorry.
Yeah. When Habermas introduced this idea of the public square, or whatever you want to call it, the public sphere, his point was you had to have an argument, and you had to win the argument. It had to be rational. And if you couldn't win the argument, that was the end of it. Now, my question is this. The most powerful secularizing force in the world, and certainly in this country, is capitalism. What function does the world of religion have in relationship to that force?
Well, I think I'm not a capitalist either. You know, I think it's kind of one of the great things about being Catholic is that I believe in the via media. Nothing to extremes except faith, hope, and love. That's my creed. And I think that capitalism it's illogical. I think that you're depending on a vice to structure society. You're saying that we're all going to base how we interact economically on greed, and it's absurd. It's a stupid statement. But how it interacts with capitalism, I think that it tempers capitalism. If you're a Christian, and a lot of folks are just cultural. They're just going with the flow. But Christianity's message is probably one of the most anti-capitalistic things around, is that, and I think the best balance, I believe in private property. I believe in the freedom of an individual to order his life, to have private property, to structure his family life the way he sees is correct. but I think we all have a responsibility to each other, and that's the message of Christianity that's counterbalancing capitalism, is saying that I'm not just a greedy, I'm not just a self-interested person. I'm supposed to be, you know, you did it to me, it was Mother Teresa's thing, the poorest of the poor is who I'm supposed to be concerned about. If a man has no blankets and I have two, I'm supposed to give him one. So that's how religion interacts with capitalism. But I'm sorry, I'm not a capitalist, so I can't go directly.
Who has a question for David? Yes, sir.
I'd like to apologize to everybody here. My husband is the moderator here, and I have unfortunately trained him to know that when somebody insists on having their say, namely me, that he must shut up. He has not been even-handed between the two speakers, and I think he ought to give some time to the other side, because this has not been an even debate.
I just did. Yes, sir.
David, you've heard Anthony a couple of times say that some people go with the flow. His inference being that the secularists are the ones that they live their life, they go with the flow. But do you think that it's the secularists that have that problem, or do you think that it's more of a problem of the theists in our society that just go with the flow, given that most of them are born and stay in the religion that they're born to? Or do you have other thoughts about that?
Well, I think the whole concept of going with the flow is that there's some truth to it. I think a lot of Americans just identify with the religion of their upbringing by default without giving it much thought. And I think on that point, Anthony has a point, that a lot of people are fairly apathetic when it comes to their true religious beliefs, and that they'll, as he says, go with the flow. Since the general flow in America is that we're a religious country and that we believe in God, and that there's this general sense that atheism is a dirty word that should be vilified, then most Americans kind of go with the flow on that without giving it a whole lot of thought. Yet when they live their day-to-day lives, I'm not so convinced that most Americans really are thinking about God and Jesus and what the Bible says at all. Most Americans couldn't even begin to rattle off the 10 Commandments, although they'll get mad as hell if you try to take them down from a public square, which really speaks volumes, doesn't it? I mean, Americans are largely apathetic and uninformed when it comes to both politics and religion. But when it comes to the simple act of identifying with the religion and reacting emotionally when somebody suggests something that's not mainstream about religion, like taking a 10 Commandments monument down, suddenly they become quite passionate about their beliefs, or their perceived beliefs. So there is, I would agree, that there's a little bit too much going with the flow, but I think most of that going with the flow is with those, the majority of Americans who are really pretty ambivalent about religion 99% of the time.
Okay, who has not been called on before?
I'd like to ask Anthony, you said earlier that you were once an atheist, and I wanted to know maybe if you could tell us why you were an atheist. And the second question is, you referred to a body of knowledge that you think David and others may be wanting to exclude. What is that body of knowledge? Can you identify? What's the body of knowledge that you think is being excluded, and why were you an atheist?
So my explanation of why I was an atheist, John Henry Newman used to say his controversy was he became a Catholic after being an Anglican, which was pretty controversial at the time. And people would ask him, why'd you become a Catholic? And he would respond, I can't fit my faith in a teacup. He had no pat answer for why his faith was the way that it was. It's a complex question. I think, frankly, I don't believe in atheists. I think we all have a sense, again, when you go to the interior room, we all have a part of ourselves that we go to when nobody's around, and we all know that we didn't make ourselves, that there's something out there. I think that that's an innate sense. So in terms of why I was an atheist, I think I was angry at God. I think a lot of people, kind of formulate. I think there's a.
Okay, so you were an atheist for the long reasons. You were angry at God.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
There are atheists who don't assume a God to begin with and are not particularly angry one way or the other.
I suppose it'd be interesting to meet such a person. I'd love to chat with him.
Yeah.
Anthony. Yeah.
We're here. We're here. We're here.
I think that we're all fairly complex creatures.
God, an atheist, is that your understanding? See, you were a teenager. That's my point. If that was your concept of atheism, then you transitioned into something that was really not that great.
I think you asked for my personal experience. That was my personal experience. And again, I would love to chat with folks, and I'm open to conversation, discussion. I'm just saying I haven't met an atheist who was.
You're sitting in a room with probably a dozen.
I'm sorry that my ignorance offends you, but I'll do my best to rectify it in the time that I have. But in terms of what was the other question?
Body of exclusion.
Oh, there's a huge body of knowledge. The teachings of world religions since the creation of the world. Judaism has a body of culture and teachings that is Jewish, and it's there's things that.
Reading Kabbalah, reading the Zohar doesn't exactly prove whether God exists or not.
No, it's not a proof. I'm not discussing a proof. I'm saying it's a body of knowledge, that there's teachings contained, there's information contained in these religious traditions. And Catholicism is probably the best example of compendiums of information. You can read, extensive books that talk about faith. It's information about the faith.
Knowledge of religion or knowledge provided by religion? Knowledge that comes from religion?
I think what you're getting at is the quality of the knowledge, like whether it's what you're talking about, scientific data, and that's not necessarily the extensive knowledge.
May I suggest the two of you get together afterward? Sure. And afterward is going to come here very soon.
If I could just quickly reply.
David wants one short rebuttal, and then we'll have one last question, and then we've got to go.
I think this question and Anthony's answer really points to part of the problem with traditional religion. We're not talking about here just the general notions of atheism and theism. When Americans talk about religion, they are talking about Christianity usually, or sometimes they'll use the term the Judeo-Christian tradition. But all the major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are revelation-based. So when you ask what body of knowledge is all of this based on, we need to realize every bit of it is on a foundation of revelation, of ancient men who claimed to hear the word of God and write it down. Okay, that's not just a general notion that there must be something up there and we'll call it God, some sort of grand. We're talking about religions that are based on the idea that this God spoke to ancient men and provided absolute truth for the rest of us to follow for the rest of time. If somebody in modern times claims that God is speaking to them, we understandably think they must be mentally ill, really. And I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. Yet we base modern theology, the major religions of the world, on the notion that ancient men did indeed get these special messages from God. So, in the absence of more convincing proof, I don't claim, adamantly that there is no God, but I just do say, I'm at least agnostic, and absent proof, I'll call myself an atheist. Thank you.
Okay. Last question from way out in the back there.
Thank you. I support atheism, but I see the biggest stumbling block to increasing secularism in America, anyway, is the judicial system. And I have seen these cases that we all have, state versus religion, and it never seems that it's accepted by any court, at least in my reading.
Invisible part. is a big part of the answer. It's any kind of movement for social justice and for equality is based on the notion of identity, of group identity pride. And for too long, secular Americans have been in the closet. Even those who are atheists will only whisper it quietly when it's safe to do so, instead of just standing up and saying, yes, I'm an atheist, I'm agnostic, I'm a secular American. So I think this identity-based movement, which is what I write about in the book, is a big part of it. And from a legal standpoint, what's different about identity-based litigation is that it's based on equal protection and equality-based non-discrimination jurisprudence, as opposed to the Establishment Clause. One thing we need to realize about the Establishment Clause is it is not an identity-based remedy. In other words, even a Christian can bring an Establishment Clause case to take a cross off of public property because the Christian believes in church-state separation. There's no identity component to Establishment Clause litigation. When you bring equal protection cases, the first thing you do in the case is you establish the validity of your demographic as a demographic that shouldn't be discriminated against, and then you move on from there. We're doing exactly that in Massachusetts. We're bringing a case challenging the under God wording of the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're telling the court specifically, we know this looks like an Establishment Clause case, but don't even go there, don't even think about it. We want the court to consider this based on principles of equal protection. And I really think this identity-based movement is going to be the game changer.
Thank you all. I think you'll agree with me that it's been a most stimulating discussion. David has books to sign.